Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is Jesse Haugen. I write music for film, television, web, podcast, just about anything you can think of. And today we're going to be talking about how to write a main theme. Let's get into it. All right, so here's what we're going to do today. I just finished a main theme for a new fantasy podcast called Tales of the Echowood. I'm going to walk you through the various versions of that theme. It's a show that hasn't come out yet. We're actually doing a Kickstarter for it right now to fund. It's a single season kind of one-off show for Homestead on the Corner, which is a company that I've worked with in the past. They do the Sheridan tapes, which I've also done a video on this channel. And if you get to the end of this video and you're stoked about the music in the show and you're interested in supporting us, that would be awesome. But either way, I hope it's just going to be really interesting as we walk through the various versions of this theme and you sort of see how it developed and changed along the way. I'll talk a little bit about what I wanted it to be from the beginning, about why I made some of the changes, about some of the feedback that I got from the director, writer, and producer Trevor, who was sort of my go-to person as we walked through what this theme needed to be, and how in just, a minute and a half of music, I really tried to lay the foundation for what the entire score is going to be. I haven't written any of the other score for this show yet, but now having this main theme sort of under my fingers, I sort of know what that's going to be, and I'll show you some of the stuff that sort of got trashed along the way. That'll end up probably being turned into cues down the road as well, which is super cool, and maybe it'll be fun for you guys to see. But anyway, yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through each of these versions. We'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll kind of go from there. Let's do it. As always, by the way, I'm putting sort of milestones and time codes in the description in case you want to sneak through and not walk through every single version. Totally understand. But if you do and you're like me, here we go. We're gonna get into it. All right. So one of the things that I knew that I wanted to do for this main theme, in the references that Trevor sent me, pretty much every reference had vocals. So I knew for sure that I wanted to do something with voice. I didn't know if that meant a solo voice or some choir or something like that, but I do know that I wanted it to be very human, to be very vocal, and preferably, because a big part of this show, if you watch the Kickstarter video, I talk about this, has to do with storytelling. Storytelling is this very ancient, very human practice, something that existed long before we could write things down. We would tell each other stories, and so I thought it would be fun to do not a song, but something vocal, because it kind of goes back to the same way musically about how we used to pass down music orally. We didn't do it on written pages. It was before we even had notation. We would sing songs. Parents would sing songs to their children, and they would sing songs, and villages would sing songs. It's just this very ancient, this very human sort of shared history that we have. And so I thought that would be a great place to start as I think about the music for this series. And as I was thinking about doing that, I got a little scared because I hate vocal samples. They're always really hard to use. And so I knew I was probably going to have someone come in and record. And then as I thought about that, I remembered I did a session for another project a long time ago, probably 2 years ago. And in that session, I recorded an amazing vocalist named Pearl Botts. And we ended up not using anything from that session. We ended up booking another session and using stuff from that one. So I had a whole session's worth of vocal phrases and stuff that we had written and recorded and just never used. And what I ended up doing with that was I made a sampler instrument out of it, just different phrases and things. And it just has sat in my template for years. I've never used it. And when I thought about this project, I immediately realized, oh my gosh, I should pull that up and look at that. Here's what that sounds like. So this is the sampler instrument. It's just a collection of phrases. Listen to these. I mean, the second I pulled those up again, I had forgotten how incredible they are. And I knew the second that I played it, this is the cornerstone, not just for the main theme, but for the show. I'm going to build everything around these phrases. This is sort of the identity of where this music is going. And as soon as you have something like that, the theme sort of just comes from there. I mean, you'll see there's a lot of things that we do to get to where we needed to be by the end. But the first thing you really need to know about writing a main theme is just find that nugget, find that one special gem, that thing that's just, oh, this is the show, this is the identity. It's immediately recognizable, it's interesting. More importantly, it inspires you, because if you really want to pour yourself into an entire score, you're going to need something that's inspiring. And obviously the show itself is going to be inspiring, but the music needs to excite you as well. And this, I was just immediately excited. So I wanted to keep it simple because I loved it so much. So I start with just a pulsing single note on harp. So there's that phrase. We don't need to do it the same the whole time. The reason I love this so much is it sounds so improvisatory. I mean, a lot of these phrases sort of were improv, kind of back and forth as we were trying to come up with different things for that other project. I love that it's not just ahs or oohs. It's some mix of it all. It just feels very organic and very human. That sort of continues. I start bringing in some simple string harmonics and pads. Really, really, really simple. Nothing particularly dramatic yet. But I love that. I loved how simple it was. And I knew that while this first version of the theme is definitely a lot simpler than it would end up, I didn't want to lose the charm of what we had here. This is the thing I needed to sell Trevor on. And so I didn't want to add too much on the first version, but I knew that it did need to go somewhere. So this is where it got really difficult, because I didn't know what to do. Basically, it continues to build, and then we swell into a B section. Now, I came up with so many different options for this B section. I think the first one I tried was that original phrase that I did with the vocals, and then I kind of added chords to it. It sounded like this. Now that's really pretty. It's not that I didn't like that. I will probably end up using that at some point in the show. But it lacked some of that initial energy and pulse that I really liked about the beginning. And so the next thing I tried was something that was far more energetic, far more continuing, that sort of pulsy idea, but totally radically different. So listen to this. Again, this is super cool and probably will turn into a cue at some point in the show. But the thing that this was missing for me was some of that initial mysterious intrigue. This is a lot more sort of fairy and pixies type fantasy, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. And I think that there may be a place for that in the show. But the main theme, I wanted it to be something that was a little more dramatic, something that sort of drew you into a world that you're not quite sure exactly what it is yet. This is a little too on the nose, and so what I ended up doing was I came up with this sort of ostinato figure, and I'm just gonna play that for you and what that sort of sounded like. It was sort of this simple, it starts like a B minor, and then E minor, B suspended, and then B. So we have that pulsing B at the beginning, and then we have now that's interesting. It's a lot more, okay, what is this? It feels fantasy still to me, but it asks more questions than it answers, which I think was something I really wanted this main theme to do. And so I needed to sort of retrofit these vocal phrases because I didn't have one that fit what I wrote there perfectly. So what I ended up doing, if you look at this, is I didn't show here, but I have this thing that I can do. I mean, I can show it to you right now. If I just take this little vocal phrase right here, and if I hit 9 on my keypad in Cubase, it basically does a sort of bounce in place, and it creates an audio file out of it. So that's what I did. Let me just undo that real quick. That's what I did here with a bunch of different phrases, sort of going off of that first one that we heard, because I knew that was sort of going to end up being the main motif. And I combined them together and I made this new one. It's similar to what you initially hear, but it adds in some of the notes from that ostinato that I wrote. Listen to this. Right? So whereas the initial one just went da 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 da, this one adds da 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 da, which sort of gets us back into that B minor to B major sort of thing, because it hits that D sharp there. So that was really cool. So then I started building that out and putting that together. Here's what that sounds like. Some low drones. So I know that I wanted this to build, and so I just sort of had strings start building in that ostinato. It basically just repeats, but a little bit bigger. Now, what you'll notice, I'm sure, right away, is what happened to the voice. There's basically no melody anymore. That ostinato kind of just became the melody. And I sort of left it that way when I first sent it to Trevor, just to get an idea if the scale and the structure was working. I didn't really know how to retrofit some of the vocals on top of what I ended up doing with the strings. And so I just decided I'm just going to send it as is, which is a great thing to do, because when you're writing music for something like a podcast or a television show or whatever, you have to remember that it's collaborative. While you are the composer, you are coming up with the ideas, you're ultimately serving the story and the ideas of the director or the producer. And so I wanted to, at this point, get Trevor's ideas just to sort of hear where he was thinking this should go, if he even liked the direction at all. But I knew when I sent this to him, even if he said 100% everything here is perfect, I wanted to go in and change things because it was missing a lot to me. So when I first sent this to Trevor, he was stoked about the idea, stoked about the direction. He didn't mind it getting big. He liked some of the impact, but just felt like we needed some more layers. He didn't love the horns that come in here. He thought that they sounded a little fake, which I agree. Especially when we have all the really human vocal stuff leading up to this point, the sample's just kind of like, oh, that's not quite working. So let me show you what I did in V2. So let's jump into V2. All right, so when I got Trevor's notes back and I had sort of spent some more time with the theme myself, I sat down to do a V2. One of the biggest changes that came in V2 was I added some things on the sort of second part of this beginning section. I kept the beginning super simple, basically just the harp and the vocals, but then I added some orchestra and some textures and some woodwinds. Listen to what became of this second part of the first section here. So that felt super cool to me. I really liked what that was doing. I thought that it was working really well. I love that there was, it was just so much more evocative. There's so many more textures and layers. I love these pads. Just listen to these pads and these woodwinds. I think they're so cool. Again, it's just asking questions. It's like you don't know, is this positive, is this negative? It leaves a lot of room for the story to sort of tell itself, basically. I have some of these string swells in here that work really well. And that all adds together and comes together and makes for just a much more interesting statement of that part of the theme, I thought. And then once we get into the B section, again, I was just struggling. I couldn't really find an identity with this. I thought that the sort of stitch together that I did of that theme was working really well in the vocals. But once it gets to the big part, I didn't really know what to do. So I just sort of made it bigger. I tried this huge melody. I'll play you what I tried here. It was cool. I did it in cello and vocals, but it just didn't really sit right. It was sort of brand new. It's cool. I didn't dislike it, but when I ended up sending it to Trevor, I muted it. I didn't think it was really working so much, and I just ended up keeping one little small melody here at the end. But if you listen to this, I have that new moving bass line, and then I added a bunch of drums. This is what sort of became in that section. So that was cool and big. I liked the feeling of that, but I wasn't utterly convinced of the melody exactly yet. But I wanted to send it to Trevor to get his idea of the scale. I did like the pulsing drum, the triplet thing I thought was cool. Trevor also had this amazing idea to tag the end of the theme with just one more statement of one of the vocal phrases. He didn't tell me which one, I just picked one and it sounded like this. Which I think was just a great idea. It's such a palate cleanser after the theme had gotten so big. So I sent this off to Trevor to get his idea because I know that things had gotten bigger. I had added a new melody. I had added some things here, especially this cello melody, which I really liked. It was a cool counterline. I thought it was working. I also had cello double vocals here if you listen to this. Thought that was cool. I thought I added an element that was interesting. So I sent this off, still not feeling 100% sold myself, but wanting to get Trevor's ideas. So then we get to V3. V3 is where things really start to change, where the theme really picks up and sort of became what it ended up as. So let's jump into V3. Okay, so after I sent V2, Trevor was feeling really good about the theme. He thought it was really working. He liked the scale, but he shared some of my concerns about that final climactic section just not really landing the right way. And then he also sort of wanted the end to have that vocal tag sort of land in a more final sort of sounding place. And so we're going to skip through a few steps. This is V3. This was technically the structure of the next thing I sent him, but it also includes some added things that I did even beyond what I sent him. So basically this was the version he approved and sort of where we're at right now as we head into the Kickstarter with some special things I'll show you throughout. So the beginning stayed exactly the same. I just bounced the vocals all down to one of these because I just thought that was so much easier. If you listen, I mean, it's literally exactly the same. So what I love is that even towards the end of this process, that initial simplicity didn't change. It's exactly the same as it was. The one thing that did change that was very exciting is I had a friend of mine, Alex Thompson, come in and record. Remember that cello line that I wrote here? I had him record live cello for that. Let's listen to this. So that just is so nice here. Just sort of adding humanity in wherever you can. I had him come in for another session, so I just tagged this on and had him record on this for a couple bars, which was great. And then as we moved in to the B section here, this is one of the first big changes I made. I realized one of the reasons this whole B section wasn't landing was because it sounded a little meandery. It sort of sounded like a vocalist was just riffing over the track rather than a specific written melody. And so what I ended up doing was I did some of my combining again with some other phrases, and I sort of just made a simple 2-part melody. So it starts the same way with that initial one that I made in the first version. So this is that first phrase. And then what I did here is I made a new second phrase that starts the same. See, repetition is sort of what lends itself to being memorable. And so I wanted to start the same with that da 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 da, but then I wanted it to go somewhere different. So we have a sort of antecedent consequent phrase, a sort of question and answer, and this is what that ended up being. That the second I did that, I was like, okay, this is gonna work. I love this. This feels super cool. I love that it opens up there as well because the vocals have been so down the entire time. So I ended up just repeating that. The cellist doubles it. Okay, now the other thing was we had talked about this next part of the B section needing to have more of an impact, and a great way to do that is to give a little bit of a gap. This is sort of a trailery thing. I didn't want to get too trailery, but this builds and then it drops to nothing and then it goes into the final section. So before I show you that, what I wanted to do is tell you the final thing, the final piece of the puzzle that solved this for me. I had been continually trying to write a brand new melody for this final big climactic section. And I'm an idiot because the answer was there the entire time. Once I figured out what this initial part of the B section was going to be, I realized I would be so dumb not to just repeat that and do it again. But this is pretty not muffled, but it's sort of down, it's quiet, it's tame vocals. And so what I ended up doing was calling that vocalist from that original session a couple years ago and just had her remote record this melody that I sort of pieced together, but big and loud and climactic. And that totally worked because now not only did we establish an actual melody that repeats, but we have a very human full range of emotions expressed in that melody. It's not just this quiet thing over and over again. We actually get a new, more emotional performance of it at a higher energy level. That totally sealed the deal for me. So let me show you that kind of breakdown into the final section with those new vocals, and then I'll talk a bit, you're going to hear it, but I'll talk a little bit about what I did to change the bass line here as well. Doesn't that it just feels so much better right away. One of the things that helped this really land as well was, instead of doing that sort of constantly moving bass line, I just opted for single big hits, like this. That's such a cool sound. Which chord wise sort of lands us in this kind of a territory, which is that's really interesting harmonically, because if you remember that arpeggio kind of keeps alternating us by way of E minor between B minor and B major. So over that B minor we put a G, which kind of is like a G major 7 sort of sound, and then the E over the B major, which is kind of like an E9. I don't know, I'm not good at jazz. It's sort of like an E major 9s kind of deal. Which is just so cool and just totally works for me. So if you listen, let's just play that arpeggio with the bass line and what that became, so you can kind of hear how that all goes together. I'll just have a lot of things are actually playing the arpeggio here. The other reason that really works is that up to this point we've had basically B in the entire bass. It's been like a pedal bass this whole time, so for it to change chords there also is why it really just all of a sudden it lands and it feels really interesting. I would also be remiss not to draw attention to this incredible vocal performance and cello performance. I had the vocal and the cello both record this melody. It's just so cool. Let's listen to this. I'll solo the cello verb as well. I use this Eventide space reverb pedal a lot of the times for my reverbs. But listen to this. Yeah, it's just so cool, so visceral and raw and emotional, and I love it so much. Record people anytime you can, because it just makes all the difference in the world. And then the final thing that I did here, I added some sort of pulsy elements. We have this little thing going throughout the whole time, which sort of matches with the triplets in the drums. I also wrote a little cello thing that goes here. And I actually kept the samples in too, so it doubles with the samples. Which goes nicely with that arpeggio ostinato thing. So then for the new vocal tag, I basically at this point had established that da 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 is like the main thing. So I decided, why don't we go back to that, but then we'll give it an ending. So it's so funny now, because listening back and going through those versions, it's like so obvious what I should have done from the beginning. Because it just didn't have an identity, I feel like, until the final version. But sometimes it just takes just sitting with something. And I mean, this is about a month, not working on it the whole time, kind of working on it on and off in between other things, but just a month of sitting with it and listening to it in the car and thinking about it and trying to get it to work before it just finally clicks, like, oh, the answer. I mean, this melody had been here basically since the very beginning, aside from these second phrases here. And just realizing, oh, I just need to lean into that and keep things simple. Most of the time, the musical answers already exist. You don't have to come up with something new. You just have to reframe what you already have. But I'm so excited about this main theme. I think it's really, really exciting and evocative and emotional. And I'm just excited to build a score off of this, honestly. There's so many things that it came up with along the way that I think are just really going to be exciting to work with and have fun with, because now all these recordings are assets. I mean, like this cello thing, like I could make a whole cue out of this cello playing the main theme. just so cool. There's like so many things I could do with that, which I definitely will. So hopefully that was interesting. I know it's a bit of a long video, but just walking you through sort of what this process looks like. It's different for every person. It's honestly even different for me for every project. This was actually one where I wrestled with it a little bit more than usual. Usually it's like come up with something and that just doesn't work. Scrap the whole thing, come up with a new thing. This was actually refining the same thing over and over and over and over, just small, simple changes until you land with what seems so obvious, so inevitable, but it just took my small peanut brain a while to get there. But we got there. I'm really happy with it. Trevor's really happy with it. This is what we're using in the Kickstarter. I'll probably get it mixed for the actual show, but I'm even pretty happy with the mix. So yeah, hopefully that was interesting. If you enjoyed this, you want to see more stuff like this, please like the video, comment, talk to me about it. I'd love to hear your questions. It's been so fun doing these videos and getting to actually talk with you guys in the comments. It's like, I love when I wake up and there's a comment and we get to talk about one of the things that you have questions about, or just something that you think about what I did. So please comment, subscribe. I promise to be making more videos. I'm sorry it took so long to do another one, but as I can and as things allow me to share, I will share the stuff that I'm working on, and hopefully you can learn a little bit in the process, or you can just enjoy it from composer to composer or music lover to music lover. You guys are the best. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.